Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So how did the month of May do on the justice front? Well, it started with the announcement of the opening of a special grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia, to investigate the election crimes of Donald Trump. And it ended, perhaps fittingly, with Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis issuing 50 grand jury subpoenas to investigate Trump's crimes. So, at least in Georgia, it looks like justice is slow and steady as she goes. But can I do a quick June preview? Because public hearings are about to open on June 9th. The January 6th Select Committee investigating the Capitol attack is going to pull back the curtain on Donald Trump's insurrection. We're going to get to see the evidence with our own eyes of the crimes that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators committed in their attempt to kill our democracy. You know the old saying, friends, that sometimes justice seems to take forever, and then it comes all at once. I am so ready for the all at once part, because justice matters. Here's a short recap of the legal stories for the month that was May 2022. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So April was an interesting month on the justice front. Here is a short recap of the legal stories for the month that was April 2022. So the Fulton County, Georgia special grand jury investigating Donald Trump's crimes kicks off in earnest today. So what's taken so long? Let's talk about why all prosecutorial norms and traditions are not necessarily good ones. Because justice matters. So a draft of a Supreme Court opinion was just leaked, and it shows that the United States Supreme Court is on the verge of revoking the constitutionally protected privacy interests of women. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. Sometimes we have to look hard to find some good news on the justice horizon, but there's a little bit out there today involving an appellate court in New York smacking down one of Donald Trump's appeals. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So Donald Trump Jr. just appeared before the January 6th committee investigating the insurrection, and he testified for a whole 2 hours. Do we really think Don Jr. told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in just 2 hours? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So Rudy Giuliani just literally and figuratively showed his contempt for Congress. So here we go again, friends. Let's ask the question, will Congress use its lawful power of inherent contempt to compel Rudy Giuliani to testify? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. You know, it seems to me that when we become aware of misconduct by Supreme Court justices, there ought to be hearings. There ought to be public hearings. There ought to be an impeachment inquiry. Because justice matters. So let's talk about why Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito should be the subject of both a perjury investigation and an impeachment inquiry. Because justice matters. So yet another former Trump administration official has written a book disclosing and discussing Trump's crimes, abuses, unfitness for office, can we talk about what we should expect from our high government officials when they come across presidential crimes and abuses and unfitness for office? Because justice matters. So Elon Musk wants Donald Trump back on Twitter. Shocking? Not. But what actually is pretty shocking is what Elon Musk said about why he was so offended when Twitter banned Donald Trump. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So one of Donald Trump's treasonous election lawyers, I know there are several to choose from, John Eastman, was just caught criming out loud in one of his own emails. What comes next? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So the January 6th Congressional Committee investigating the Capitol attack just subpoenaed 5 members of Congress to testify about the insurrection. What could possibly go wrong? Or right? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So let's have some fun on this Friday at Donald Trump's expense and talk about the new federal grand jury investigation that was just opened into Donald Trump's theft of top secret government documents that he had boxed up and shipped off to Mar-a-Lago, or as I like to call it, Papergate. Friends, this one has legs. Let's talk about it. Because justice matters. So Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, and 3 other members of Congress have been subpoenaed by Congress to testify about the crimes of Donald Trump. What do they risk if they defy those subpoenas, refuse to testify, and continue to cover up the crimes of Donald Trump? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So what do you get when you combine unrestricted gun access with unrestricted hate speech? You get today's America. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So the January 6th committee has Kevin McCarthy in a trick bag. And the committee has actually set things up in a tactically shrewd way. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So as the good people of Buffalo are left to deal with the aftermath of that horrific mass shooting incident, it's pretty clear that America sits firmly planted at a crossroads, at an intersection of unrestricted access to assault rifles and other weapons of war and unrestricted hate speech that fills our airwaves and our social media platforms. Hate speech that, if not necessarily intended to inspire imminent violence, it sure is likely to inspire imminent violence, particularly against minorities and immigrants. And the only question is, what is our federal government going to do about it? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So the Department of Justice has asked the January 6th committee investigating the insurrection for the evidence it has developed courtesy of the testimony of 1,000 witnesses. This is an important development. Let's talk about it. Because justice matters. So Donald Trump's never-ending election fraud is rearing its ugly head again at the moment in Pennsylvania, which Trump is trying to corruptly make the land of Oz. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. So Big Bill Barr is apparently ready to testify before the January 6th committee. I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not exactly prepared to believe much of what Bill Barr has to say. But let's talk about it, because justice matters. So we have Rudy Giuliani testifying to the January 6th committee. We have Bill Barr saying he will testify to the January 6th committee. We've got a congressman named Loudermilk who has been caught, notwithstanding his denials, giving reconnaissance tours of the Capitol on January 5th, the day before the Capitol attack. We've got the White House photographer turning over photographs that she took of Donald Trump cheering on the insurrection as his angry mob attacked Capitol police officers. We have friends of Roger Stone flipping on him. We have Ginny Thomas, wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, caught in emails urging state election officials to corruptly throw the election to Donald Trump, and more. There is a lot going on, friends. Let's get to it, because justice matters. So, treasonous lawyer John Eastman is trying to hide from the J6 committee, and by extension from the American people, some really important evidence involving Donald Trump's direct involvement in the insurrection. Spoiler alert, he won't get away with it. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So friends, I know that some days seem dark on the justice front, but there is reason for optimism. Optimism that Donald Trump will be held accountable for his crimes. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Get ready, friends, because we're going to talk about Donald Trump, Kellyanne Conway, Rudy Giuliani, and presidential pardons. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So it looks like the Department of Justice, and more importantly, a federal grand jury, may be closing in on Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, and some of Donald Trump's other treasonous lawyers. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Given some new reporting, the evidence is mounting that Donald Trump didn't just incite the insurrection, he committed the crime of treason. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Well, friends, we now know the lengths to which Donald Trump would go to retain the presidency. And it's ugly, dangerous, deadly, and ultimately treasonous. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So we just learned that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy will probably blow off the congressional subpoena he received. He would rather commit crimes himself than have to testify about the crimes of Donald Trump. Let's talk about some of the foundational principles of our rule of law. And let's talk about the consequences of Kevin McCarthy deciding to be in contempt of Congress rather than tell the American people about Donald Trump's crimes. Because justice matters. Well, it seems like things are heating up for old Donald Trump down in Fulton County, Georgia. You remember that's where Donald Trump said, look, just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. Well, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis seems to have a little something to say about that. Let's talk about it, because justice matters. So as President Biden visits Uvalde, Texas, a scene of unfathomable horror, what can he do about this national emergency, this public health crisis in which we find ourselves courtesy of unrestricted access to weapons of war. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. So, according to Peter Navarro, a federal grand jury is investigating Donald Trump's crimes. And according to Donald Trump himself, he's feeling the squeeze. Let's talk about that, because justice matters.